Thank you all so much for coming again. I have the rare distinction of being the person standing between all of you and drinks and networking, so I will try to keep this brief. After all this automation, drinks and networking might be all that's left for us to do. We've talked a lot about the changes that are coming down the pipe, and I want to spend some time talking about what the future could look like and Clarity's journey with generative AI. All right, so we all know that generative AI is really smart, but what does really smart actually mean in numbers? So this is a graph showing a metric called MMLU. It's one of the benchmarks with which to measure intelligence. Measuring intelligence of generative AI is actually a very tough thing to do. It's like measuring intelligence of a human being. A human can do so many things. How can you bring that down to a single number? Well, MMLU tries to do that. It's a variety of different benchmarks kind of boiled into one. You can see that all the way on the left-hand side, we have GPT-2 in 2018 at 30% and change. Get GPT-3 in 2020. Some of you might recall the splash around that. But really, it's been in the last 12 months, tremendous increase in the rate of innovation. These models are largely either from Google or OpenAI. The best one, of course, being GPT-4 with, I think, 84%. So it is better than an expert at most tasks, which is really quite remarkable. And there's a number of players just churning out models. Google, of course, recently released PaLM 2, which is quite sophisticated as well. There are companies like Mosaic and Stability that are helping organizations train their own models in-house. So it's really not just one or two companies that are able to do this. We're seeing a number of models, a number of players reaching expert-level intelligence on a multitude of different tasks. Why is this moment actually different? So all of us have kind of lived in the golden age of computing. We've seen cloud proliferation, of course, the internet, crypto as well, for what it's worth. But why is this moment actually different? To me, it comes down to two things. One is speed of adoption, which we've talked about a lot. We all compare it to the internet, but if we go even further back, like the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, transformation took place over literally hundreds of years. Internet took multiple decades, the move to cloud slightly less, but we can't take it for granted that every new technology is going to be adopted quickly. Take something like nuclear fusion, which is also being talked about a lot today. That is a technology that will take many, many years to adopt. So there are certain properties of this technology that make it very quick to build on, which I think is very unique and is going to lead to a world that we've never seen before. The other thing that I think is unique about this is what I call the cognitive revolution. So the cognitive revolution is actually the name of a podcast that I like listening to about generative AI. So if you're interested, definitely worth checking it out. But the basic thought is we can think about all work along two dimensions. There's cognitive versus manual, repetitive versus non-repetitive. And until this point in history, everything that we've been automating is largely repetitive work. And it started off with more manual work. So, of course, the Industrial Revolution, we had knitting Jenny, that's cognitive and manual. Even the Agricultural Revolution, we were automating things that are repetitive and manual. And you move over to 20th century, we have automated teller machines. We have switchboards that are being automated. These are marginally cognitive, but heavily repetitive in nature. Recently, we have some non-repetitive manual tasks like car manufacturing plants. But for the longest time, cognitive, non-repetitive tasks have been the exclusive preserve of the human mind. This is really what makes us unique. It's the prefrontal cortex that animals don't have that allows us to do advanced reasoning. I think this is also why when we see an inanimate being do something cognitive and non-repetitive, it's very perplexing. It feels like we're talking to a human being. When you're chatting with ChatGPT, this is why this question of is it sentient or not, evokes so much debate. It's hard for us to understand this. I think this is what makes this moment so unique and so special. We've talked about this a bunch, but this is a snapshot of what it looks like right now. You have a lot of platform companies, a lot of ops companies, very few at the application layer, even fewer at the enterprise application layer. I think most of the application are consumer tools of can we generate this kind of video and that kind of image. Enterprise applications, of course, are typically hidden in the innards of large organizations. It's maybe harder for developers to understand. And so we have a dearth of applications here. I think that's probably something all of us acknowledge. And I think that's a huge arbitrage opportunity for all of us seated right here. We're in the unique position of both appreciating a technology as well as having access to applications that are kind of underpopulated and undersaturated. Compare that to something like driverless cars, where you have a massive oversaturation of talent. I think accounting and finance applications have low-hanging fruit, easy to automate, but very few people actually trying it. So whether we're building things in-house, or whether we're using ChatGPT or Bard to help us, or bringing vendors in, I think it's a major opportunity for all of us to drive automation and efficiency. Also, I think what has happened very recently that is going to guide the proliferation of this is almost overnight, AI has entered every enterprise user's daily workflow. You had both Microsoft and Google in rapid succession adding generative AI to their entire suite of products. So Microsoft calls it Copilot 365, so that puts the Copilot to Autopilot discussion to bed. Google calls this Duet. It's in Docs already. I think many of you might have even seen this. Soon it's going to be in Sheets and a variety of other products. This is pretty remarkable. It means that overnight, hundreds of millions of people, potentially more than 1 billion people, are now interacting with generative AI on a daily basis. What that means is, for a whole bunch of applications, everything you're doing in Word or Google Docs or spreadsheets can become more efficient almost immediately. I think there's also a more profound implication of this, which is that the expectations of users from applications are going to evolve very quickly. Now that all of us have interacted with Google, if a company is going to ship search, that is the bar that they're held against. Similarly, we're going to have 1 billion plus people interacting with generative AI, and that is going to shape their expectations from every tool that they interact with. So the bar for building a generative AI native application just went up a lot. I also want to talk about the risks of generative AI. I think we've talked about the hurdles to deploying technologies. I also want to talk about some of the macroeconomic and risks to, frankly, humanity. We'd be remiss to not mention them. There's introduction of bias, harmful and inappropriate content. We all know that these are trained on pretty much the entire internet. We don't want them to mimic the exact biases that they see online. And I think, to the credit of the organizations, largely OpenAI and Google, that are putting these models out, they're doing tremendous amounts of good work to try to control this. I know OpenAI in particular had GPT-4 for almost 6 months in-house just to bring these biases and the risk of inappropriate content down. Hallucinations and unreliability. For business-critical workflows like accounting and finance workflows, you can't have a system that is right 20% of the time. You've probably all had a moment where you ask ChatGPT something or Bard something, and you very confidently get a wrong answer. You ask it the same thing again, you get a confident but differently wrong answer. That's just not going to fly for these kinds of applications. And when we think about healthcare, using this for therapy potentially, education, the risks get even larger. Going back to the whole cognitive revolution concept, I think it becomes even more insidious when you're interacting with something that you consider to be human, because you almost expect that everything it's going to say is right. So when it's wrong, you don't expect it, and something very, very bad could happen. Amazon and Netflix both use AI to recommend shows and products. None of us go into that assuming 100% of what it recommends is going to be correct. There's a reasonable assumption that these are just machines, they're not sentient. I'll take it as a suggestion, but not completely. I think this technology is fundamentally different. We've already seen examples of where people use ChatGPT as their therapist, sometimes to adverse results. So I think that's something very important to be considered as well. Data privacy and security. We spend a lot of our time talking to our customers about releasing generative AI, and the #1 concern that comes up by far is my data going to turn up in a future foundation model? Can somebody ask whatever model 3 years from now about my data and then get a response and potentially have my data leaked? Fortunately, all of the front runners have taken a very proactive and positive stance on this. OpenAI and Google have declared unequivocally that data is not going to be used to train future models. And OpenAI has even gone the additional step of kind of giving some of those protections to consumers using their product. And then finally, and this is a pretty extreme one, but there is a group of people that are very concerned about overall human annihilation. I wouldn't count myself in that group, but it's significant enough that I thought I should mention it. And the argument goes something like this. The reason human beings dominate the planet is because we are more intelligent than every other being here. If there's a form of intelligence that is greater than us, why would it not dominate us? And there's a conversation to be had about what that'll look like. But it's actually pretty interesting that a lot of the experts in the field are the ones that are most concerned, which doesn't happen very often. So there's a lot of work being done in governments and regulatory agencies to address this, which is positive. The Biden-Harris administration met with the CEOs of most of the foundation model companies fairly recently. The European Parliament is looking at new roles on artificial intelligence. The SEC is establishing ethical AI framework. Italy, I think, was the most extreme and banned ChatGPT outright for a period, but then reinstituted it shortly thereafter. Two things that really stick out to me, because this is not a cycle that anyone is unfamiliar with, right? A new technology comes around, regulators, well, try to be fast to introduce some rules. Two things that seem different this time is the people who are most proactive and to some extent the most concerned are the experts. And you don't see that very frequently. If we think back to crypto, there's the people in the middle of crypto who are like, hey, please don't regulate us at all. And it was the government who was saying, no, we need to insert some regulation to protect consumers. Here it's almost the opposite. There was a significant cohort of people in the AI community advocating for a pause, which commercially is like very detrimental to them, but still so concerned about the impacts that this could have. And we've never had a case where such a transformational technology is deployed so quickly that society itself may not be ready for it. The second thing that's interesting to me, listening to Sam Altman's recent testimony in front of Congress, is a lot of the senators were very upfront about the potential, the positive potential of AI. I think it was Senator Booker who said, there is no way we are going to pause this. And you have other senators saying, this is our competitive edge against China. So it's almost like a reversal of the roles where the private sector and the creators are saying, hey, we should be careful. And then some folks in government, not everybody, sees it as a tremendous competitive advantage. So it's an interesting dynamic that I don't think we've really seen before with other technologies. Wanted to spend some time talking about our generative AI story. And I will say that the deeper we go into this, the more humbling it is, and the more I realize how little I know, I think how little we as an organization know. But for what it's worth, I just want to share kind of what our story has been. Whoops, wrong direction. Oh God, still the wrong direction. Okay, going. Small button? Oh, got it. Okay, please unremember all of that. Okay, here we go. So two things happened late last year. ChatGPT came out, Flan T5 came out, one from OpenAI, the other from Google. And we played around with it just in the interface, and we were blown away. It was clear to us that this is intelligence that we've never seen before, and specifically for what Klarity does, which is, we automate document workflows. The reason that's difficult is these are very dense documents, order forms, MSAs, what we call colloquially legalese. And we were impressed by how they were able to deal with it. So we knew that we had to be proactive about this. So we set out on a 1-month generative AI sabbatical. And the way that we split this up was we started with the executive team thinking about strategy. We didn't want to make the mistake of saying, hey, let's just ship some widget so that we can call ourselves a Gen AI company and score an easy win. We really wanted to think about how is this going to change the world that Klarity is building towards? How is this going to change the way that people interact with documents and document-centric workflows? So over the course of multiple days, we sat down for hours on end, first all coming up to speed on what are large language models, what are the possibilities, and then brainstorming at length. And what was interesting is, even amongst ourselves, being an AI company, there was this temptation to move towards incremental ideas of what it can do for our existing stack, rather than the really provocative but much more important kind of strategic ideas that are a very different vision of the world. So we caught ourselves, or we had to catch ourselves doing that, say, no, let's steer away from the incremental things. There'll be lots of time for increasing efficiencies. This is about strategy, and this is about vision. After that, we had like a Miro board with 100 ideas. We dumped them in a spreadsheet, and we brought it down to 5 hypotheses. It was, can it do generalized extractions on tabular and free text data? Can it match entities together? And a few others. And basically, it was if LLMs can do these 5 things, then this vision of the world that we see is possible. And we should pivot our company, we should pivot our product around generative AI. So it's a pretty high stakes thing to do. And we set out to do it in the next few weeks, in 3 weeks. So we had a subset of the engineering team, a small subset of the engineering team, focusing on this. And that was a challenging thing to do because we take our commitments to our customers very seriously. It's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about doing right by them and continuing to push the needle. So we took a small subset of the engineering team and basically had every engineer be the CEO of their own work stream, of one of these hypotheses. And over the, we planned a month, but it only took 3 weeks. We have a phenomenal engineering team, that's part of it, but part of it is this technology is so easy to work with, so quick to get results from. So in 3 weeks, we had conviction that this is a technology we should build our product on. And we spent the last part of the month building a roadmap for Klarity 2.0, a new generative AI version of the product. These were some of the principles that we followed in our generative AI transformation that I think might translate over to other organizations as well. The first is speed. It's trite to say, but we're talking about speed at a scale that has never been seen before. All of our deadlines were set on the order of hours. If someone says, I'm going to get this done today, is it today morning or is it today evening? And benchmarks were being broken every single day. Learnings over product. So when we were going through the sabbatical phase, we're very clear with the team that we're not here to ship something, which is weird. We usually don't say that as a product organization. We are going to measure our progress by learnings, and falsification is also a valid learning. So really giving people the freedom to fail, because failing and falsifying something also teaches us a valuable lesson. Radical ownership with radical collaboration. So we set the high-level guidelines if this is what we're trying to test, but beyond that, it was up to each workstream owner. They were the CEO, the product manager, the engineer, all of it. And there were obviously rigorous guidelines about which data they can use and how they can use it, but the specific means by which to do it was very bottoms up and not top down. And I think this is, without that kind of management structure, you can't move at the speed that we had to. And then finally, leadership involvement. We knew early on that this is not something that we can delegate out and say, ask a small team of folks to come back to us with an AI strategy. Having the entire leadership team spend multiple days is a massive investment of time. It's not something we do lightly, but we knew that if we don't do that, it's just not going to pan out the way we need it to. Okay, so we went through all of this and we started work on Klarity 2.0 in February. It was going to be a new version of the product built on generative AI. And for the months of February and March and part of April, we were just building this out. Basically, what took us 5 years to build the first time over, could we replicate it in 2 months? Pretty ambitious goal. And on April 24th, we launched this new version of the product to a large set of our customers. On May 10th, we did a public launch. And it came with 4 new features. Document chat, which I'll show you in a second, but the ability to actually have a conversation with your document as if it's a living person. Configuring your checklist using plain spoken English. So saying, hey, I have this very non-standard kind of acceptance that I'm looking for in my hundreds of thousands of documents that I process annually, and instead of having to train it on vast amounts of data, just describing it in plain English. Intelligent matching, so being able to compare, so in this case, we have 2 shipping addresses that could be different because of OCR errors, or you could have, for example, IBM versus International Business Machines, referring obviously to the same entity, but that look very different. Matching tables, a table in a PO versus a table in an order form could look very differently than each other. And finally, semantic search, giving you Google-style search within Klarity. So I think it is, again, very telling about the technology that this amount of infrastructure was possible in the span of just 2 months. And I think this also emphasizes why speed is so important, because if you're not this quick, your competitors will be able to make this much progress pretty much overnight. So this is what we also shipped, because we found that we ourselves were very surprised by the capabilities of AI. We had so many of these eureka moments where we're like, we didn't think it'd be good with table data. Why is it that if we just paste table data in, it's able to structure it very well? And we wanted to put something out there for the world so that most people who also think that documents have to be read by a human can actually see that, no, this is automatable today. So we launched this thing, demo.tryklarity.com, where anybody can upload a document and it'll automatically populate a checklist for them. And then right before we launched it, we went, what if we add chat into it? And my immediate reaction was, it sounds like a stupid idea. Like, why would someone want to chat with a document? Seems really inefficient, but we're like, screw it. Like, we'll just add it anyway, see what happens. It took us 12 hours to add this feature in. Again, I'm not patting us on the back. We have a phenomenal team, but I think it really says a lot about the technology that you can add a feature like this so quickly. Using chat, what you can do is ask it for basic metadata. What is the start date? What is the end date? If there's not an end date, add the start date in the term. Ask it for non-standard terms that would take you minutes to read through the agreement, or hours potentially if it's a very long MSA. You can ask it to do table operations. So, hey, multiply every quantity by every unit price, add them all together compared to the total list price before discount. Does that perfectly. We've talked a bunch about writing accounting memos, writing accounting conclusions, drafting emails, literally hundreds of different unique tasks that in the previous paradigm of AI would have taken months, if not years to build, was built and shipped in 12 hours. And that was a very humbling moment to us of, this is the kind of power that is within grasp of everybody. And it's no longer a competitive advantage where you need a team of PhDs to do it. If you have access to these models, access to these APIs, anybody can do it, which is why, again, I think speed and iteration, knowing your customer and solving for the entire workflow is very important. If any of you are interested, this continues to be live, public, and free, so you're welcome to play around with it. With all that said, here are some of our predictions for the next year, and it comes with the huge caveat that no one knows what the heck the future is going to look like, particularly with generative AI. Take it with a pinch of salt. But here's some of the things that I'm particularly excited for. The first is multimodal models, which is a bit of a tongue twister to say. A modality represents kind of a form of input. So text is a modality, voice is a modality, image is a modality, vision is a modality. Multimodal models mean models that span multiple modalities. So having a model that can take an image and text and process them together. Today, the state-of-the-art models, PaLM 2, ChatGPT, cannot do that, but both Google and OpenAI are releasing models that are multimodal in nature. Many other organizations are going to do the same, and it's easy to see why that could be just revolutionary. I mean, if we take document automation, which Klarity does, today, we are not able to actually look at a table. Our models have to kind of take the text that's like effectively copy-pasted and make sense out of it. They're still able to do very well, but it's a very challenging thing to do. Imagine if you have models that can look at the text and look at the document and then make sense of them together. And then when you multiply that with all of the other modalities, the possibilities are endless. The second thing that I'm fairly confident of is we are going to see an open source model of similar capability to GPT-4 or PaLM 2 in the next year. The open source revolution is kind of hot on the heels of these foundation models that are private. There are some organizations that are taking a fundamentally open source approach, Facebook being the biggest example of this. And I think there's a lot of use cases where an open source model, a small open source model, could be better. It could have to do with privacy and security. It could have to do with runtime. It could be that you can't run a 175 billion parameter model on your iPhone, and you're better off using a tiny open source model there. But I think all of this is to say that the genie's out of the bottle. There's no saying, hey, can we just stop AI? And if Google and OpenAI were to pull the plug, will this all come to an end? Not at all. There's many, many other providers creating these open source models, and very soon, many developers will be able to train these models themselves, which is both, I think, empowering and call for safety and some amount of concern as well. The third trend is the agent revolution. So you can think of an agent as generative AI kind of doing a task on your behalf. So one of the simplest examples is somebody had, I think GPT or some other generative AI order pizza for them. So, fairly mundane, repetitive, not earth-shattering. But I think what's pretty thought-provoking about this is it kind of closes this air gap where previously we thought of generative AI or like ChatGPT and Bard as they live in this little tab in your browser and you can go ask them questions, and then to do a real world thing, you like copy paste a response and you send an email or you do whatever you have to do. But the agent revolution is closing that air gap to say, hey, these models can call APIs themselves, whether that API is to order you pizza, whether that API is an enterprise integration to ingest data or to send data downstream, they're going to be acting on your behalf. And if we kind of follow this idea to its natural conclusion, you can loop it, where they call an API, they get feedback, and they're able to do very complex actions on their own. Once again, very powerful, also concerning, because these models can have impacts on the real world in our physical lives on a completely autonomous basis. There are companies in the defense sector that are using this for defense applications that could have pretty severe implications. Finally, I think we're going to see a boom in the application layer. This whole paradigm of largely having companies operating at the foundation model layer and at the infrastructure layer, I think is going to be broken, and there are a lot of companies already working at the application layer. It just takes more time, because to build a valuable enterprise application, there's a kind of much higher bar, and the reliability, the scalability, the security. But I think we're going to see a lot of these companies emerging in the next year, which is why I think for all of us here, we have a valuable head start. It's predicted that generative AI will impact over 300 million jobs. And we've talked a number of times about this today. You've also heard a number of times that most executives are already thinking about this, which I think, again, sets it apart from most other technologies, where it takes a lot of time for people to get on board. Even with cloud, there were a lot of organizations that said, for the longest time, we will never trust a cloud provider, and it took decades for that to change. We're not seeing that at all here. There's a acceptance that this is both an existential threat and the opportunity of a lifetime for most enterprises. But I think what is lacking today is a bias to action. There's an acknowledgement of the importance of this, but I don't think there's an acknowledgement or an appreciation of the sheer speed at which companies have to operate. This is a quote from Bruce Lee, who I consider to be an excellent product advisor. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. You have a few companies that are really leading things at the forefront. To say who's going to be a long-term winner and long-term loser is not my place, and very hard to predict. But definitely these companies that are acting quickly are going to be at an advantage. And history teaches us what happens to those companies that don't. The Netflix versus Blockbuster paradigm has played itself out so many times. And so I think even if the economy as a whole does better, there will certainly be winners and losers. And I think that'll happen at an individual level as well. Within an organization, it's not going to be AI that's automating humans. It's going to be a human with AI who's automating away a human without AI. And the people who lean into this and really try to use it as their co-pilot for more things are going to be the winners here. So I think that's the opportunity that all of us have. And the very fact that we're all here means that we care about it and are probably incorporating it into our workflows already. So with that, I want to thank you all so much again for coming to our inaugural conference. It really means the world to us, and it's been an honor to have you. My name is Nischal. These are my contact details. As you can tell, I'd love to nerd out about generative AI. So if any of you have questions, find me after or email me. And yeah, thank you again.